This tutorial is to help those new to Affinity Photo and to photo editing in general. So I want to show how to make like a simple composition like this picture here, which is made up of 4 different images, which is one is the buildings, 2 is the sky with the birds in it, the 3rd is the jumbo jet silhouette, and the 4th is this man climbing up the side of the building here. All these images were got from Pixabay.com, and I will add a link to these particular images in the description for this video, so you can get them and follow along if you want, or you can just use your own images. Now this is an adaptation of a Photoshop tutorial which I got on a cover CD of one of my magazines. It was made by Gavin Hoey, who has his own YouTube channel that has many very good Photoshop tutorials and tutorials on taking photographs as well. It's well worth checking out. So we're going to start off looking at selections, but this is looking at selections and layers. Now, as Gavin says in his Photoshop video, you know, just looking at selections or just looking at layers is a very big topic, and you can't really cover one of these subjects in a single video. But as this is only for beginners, we're just sort of doing a very quick glossary, hopefully, of both topics, and trying to compress both into one video. So we're going to have a look at selection tools first. The most basic selection tool really is found in this icon here on the toolbar down the left, which by default should be the rectangular marquee tool. If you click on the little arrow at the bottom here, you will get other options. You've got the elliptical, column and row, but I will stick with the rectangular marquee tool, and I will just click and hold down the left mouse button and drag out a selection. So this selection is now has a boundary of little black and white dots, which many people call marching ants. So everything inside the marching ants is the area that is being selected. Now if I just press the delete key, that will delete everything that's inside the selected area, leaving everything okay on the outside. So I'll just press Ctrl and Z just to undo that. But if I invert this selection, which you can do from up here, select menu and invert pixel selection, or you can do Ctrl, Shift and I, what is now selected is everything outside of that area. So if I press delete now, it will lose everything outside of that area, leaving the inside. So I'll press Ctrl and Z to go back to where I was, and I'll also press do the invert pixel selection, so it is the inside again that is being selected. Now, as with all the selection tools, pretty much all anyway, I think, you get the option to start a new selection, which is what I did here, the first one, or you can add to a selection. So this is clicked on add at the moment, so I could draw another marquee tool and we have a different selection altogether. And then I could also go to the elliptical, and we're still on add, and I could draw an elliptical. So this weird shape is now all being selected. And if you don't like part of this, you can go to subtract and subtract part of that selection. So if I press delete now, you can see that the areas that have been subtracted from that selection is not been deleted. So I'll press Ctrl and Z again to bring that back, and I will press Control and D to lose all of that selection area. So that is the most basic selection tool, which is the marquee tools. Now the other selection tools that are available is this one here, which is the Flood Select tool, and the one just above it, which is the Selection Brush tool, and one that is at the bottom of this rectangular menu, which I must admit I'm not 100% certain why they put it in this menu. They should really have an icon of its own, in my opinion, but it is the Freehand selection tool. So the Freehand selection tool and the flood fill and the brush tool are probably the ones you will use most of all, rather than the marquee, because this is the most simple basic, because it just does shapes. But I just wanted to point out that that is available for you. So let's move on and go to our first picture, which is the buildings. Yeah. Right. So as you can see from this image here, yeah, it's not a bad picture as far as the buildings are concerned, but the sky is very bland and not a lot going on there. So if I added an adjustment layer of, say, levels, I could alter the levels to try and bring back a bit of colour and features in the sky. Not that there's a lot in this particular sky, but if there were some clouds there, they may show up. But you're doing that at the expense of the whole picture, so that buildings now look really bad, even though I've now finally got a bit of colour in the sky. So this is why we need to make selections. Let me just delete that. So because we need to select the sky to alter it differently. So I'm going to come to the Flood Select tool first of all, and as you can see, it's like I said before, you've got the new, add and subtract. You've also got a tolerance level, which is the tolerance of how much will be selected, because what this tool does, it will, wherever you click, it will select pixels that are very similar in colour, tone, and much like that. So the higher the tolerance, the more it will select. So you pretty much want a low tolerance, but I'm going to start off at the 20%, and I have also got contiguous ticked. So if I just click here in this sort of whiter area of the sky, as you can see, it is now pretty much selected all of the sky round to here, but not this sort of darker blue area up here. That's because these all are pretty much within the same tonal range. So on the face of it, that is pretty good selection. So if I now go to add, and I select somewhere up here in this darker blue, it has now also started to select parts of the building, which I don't want, because there must be some pixels in here that are of a very similar tonal range as that dark blue sky up there. So let me press Ctrl and Z to go back one step, and if I drop the tolerance down, say to about 5%, it might be a bit too low, let's try 5%, and then click in this area here. As you can see, it has just done that corner. So I click in this middle bit here. It has now done all of the sky without selecting any of the building, just because I lowered down the tolerance of this particular tool. Now I must admit, me personally, I'm not a big fan of this tool. It's okay with a big area like this that's fairly light and the same sort of tone, but it's very easy to select areas you don't want, And also, if you click and move slightly, the tolerance will alter, and I find that very annoying. If I press Control and D to get rid of all of that selection area, if I just click and drag, if you watch this tolerance number up here, if I click and drag as I'm coming across, that is raising up much higher, and it is, you can quite easily just move slightly while you don't know what happened there, but it will move slightly while you just accidentally just move a fraction. So I'm not a big fan of this particular tool. So I'll press Control and D to get rid of that selection. So I'll now move on to the selection brush tool. Now this only has add or subtract, so I'll go with add, and this works a bit much like a normal brush where you can change the size of the brush. You can do that with the left and right square bracket keys on the keyboard. You can raise the size of the brush and lower the size of the brush. So I've also got snap to edges, and if I just click and paint that area there, as you can see, it's selected pretty much all of that building, and I'll do the same on this side, and it is selected now the rest of the sky. It is not as finicky in my mind as the flood selection tool, so if I can, 9 times out of 10 I will stick with the selection brush tool for making more basic and easier selections. So I now have my sky selected. Right, now one thing you may want to do, and it's pretty much as I would say you need to do this with all the selection tools, is to zoom in to your image and just have a quick check of the selection that has been made, because I can guarantee that at some point somewhere around here there is something that has been missed. You watch, it's going to prove me wrong this time. Oh no, there it is. There's a little bit of that building up there that has just missed. I'll reduce the brush size down, and I'll just, oh, it must be on subtract. Alright, so let's just go down and round, see if I've anything else that I've missed. Alright, now this one's a much squarer building, so it's unlikely I've missed anything here. No, I mean, there's a little bit up there, but I'm not going to try and get that. So I'll press Control and 0 to bring the image back to the full size, but it is worth doing that just to make sure there's no areas you've missed. And also, especially if you're using the flood select tool, you can zoom in and just double check that you haven't selected part of the image that you want to keep by mistake. And again, you could use the selection brush tool just to subtract that from the selection. The beauty of all these select tools is that you don't have to stick with one. You can chop and change between the two, and they can add and subtract from the selection. It doesn't matter which tool you're on, it will just work with the selection that you have on the go. So if I just press the delete key now, we get rid of the sky and we have the selection, which is what I wanted. But before I do that, I'm going to press Control and Z to bring the sky back. Now, although we have made a pretty good selection here, it will be a very sort of hard-edged selection, and we just really want to sort of smooth out those edges slightly by what is known as feathering. Now, not all of the selection tools have this option, but there is a refine button up here. But if the selection tool that you're on hasn't got it, you can come up to select and come down to refine edges. You can go straight to just using a feather option, but I personally prefer refine edges. If I come to, and it's the same thing, if I click on this option here, it will bring up the refine selection menu, as will that option from the select menu, and by default it will make the selected area red, but you can change that. You can have it black, white, or you can go with black and white, or transparent, but red works pretty well because you can still see what it is through the image through the red, so it probably works the best. Now let me zoom into this quite a bit here, and hopefully this will work okay. If I normally, you only really want a feather of about 1 or 2 pixels, but if I push this right the way up as far as it will go, we'll just have to wait for it to do its job. Hopefully you can see this. Let me come off that tool a second. Oh damn, we shouldn't have done that. Let's try that again. Go back to which tool was we on that one? Sorry, my mistake there. I shouldn't have changed tools. Yeah, so if I bump this up to 100, hopefully you can see here that red texture overlay is starting to come into the white of the sky here, so it would be selecting some of that sky as well, which you don't want because you're going to end up with a sort of a white glow around the building. So which is why we're only going to feather it about 1 maybe or 2 pixels. It's gone on 1.4, so I mean you can't really see that it's just nudging into the sky area slightly, and it will help blend the selected area into the new background. You can, I'm not 100% certain exactly how this works that well, but there is a ramp option here which will, you can move it right or left to sort of just nudge that back a little bit or forward a little bit, but like I said, I'm not 100% certain when and where to use that best, so invariably I just leave ramp on 0 and then click apply. Now as you can see here, that area there has been selected, which I don't want, and I must have missed that when I zoomed in, so let's just zoom in again and get that. Right, so we're on right, I think that was the only bit I missed. Yep, Control and 0. But you see what I mean about it's so easy to miss something that's been selected by mistake. So I've now refined my selection, and I could just now press delete to get rid of the sky and be ready for the new sky that I want to add. But I personally, I'm not a big fan of doing that. What I prefer to do is to duplicate at this point, which is the keyboard shortcut is Control and J, and what that does is it will duplicate the selected area. So, and at the moment what I want is the buildings to be duplicated, not the sky. So what I need to do is to invert this selection. So I'll come to select and invert pixel selection. So it is the building that will be duplicated, and I will press Ctrl and J. So if I now turn off that background, as you can see, this layer just has the buildings on it. So now I have that layer, I can press Ctrl and D and get rid of the selection area. Why I do this is, if at some later date I find I've made a major mistake, I've always got that image there available for me to sort of maybe help rescue it by using it again. So once I have my selection, I can just turn it off and just keep it there as a safety net and work from this image here. So now we need the new sky area. Let me just highlight this layer to make sure that this is the layer I'm working on, and what I will do is I will rename this, and I'll just call it buildings. You don't have to rename layers, but it does help sometimes if you've got many layers on the go. So I'm going to add a new layer, and that will be this sky image with the birds on it. So I'm just going to right click the layer here, come to copy, or you can do Control and C, and come up to the edit menu and come to the image we are working on, come to the edit menu and paste, or Control and V. Now as you can see, this image is now a new layer above my buildings layer. So I'll just quickly rename that sky. So this new layer, as you can see, it is slightly smaller than the image that is below, and this is also another reason why I sort of keep the background image that I've got hidden. If I turn that off and that off for a second and bring this back and come to the move tool, because this is here, still here, and it has the padlock on it, it is sort of stopping this image from being resized, because this is the set size for this document, and it has a padlock on it. So hopefully the other ones, you can resize these ones, but you can't resize that one unless you take the padlock off. So if I come to this sky layer, as you can see, because we're on the move tool, it shows you the size of that image. So although it is smaller vertically, horizontally it is much bigger. So I can now resize this. So I will come to one of the corners, hold down the Control key, which will keep it everything in proportion, and I'll click and drag that out a bit and just move it down. So that is now covering the building image. Now because this is on the normal blending mode, it won't allow you to see anything that is underneath it. You can change things by changing the blending mode, but I will come to that later. But what I now need to do is to bring this layer down and put it underneath the buildings layer. So what I'll do is I will click and hold down the left mouse button, drag this layer down until a blue line comes all the way across and between these two layers, like that. So that layer is now behind the buildings layer. and as you can still see that the size of this image, and we're still on the move tool, and so I can just click and move this around until I'm happy with the image, and if need be I can still resize it a little bit just to give me a bit more sky to play with. Let's try it about there. Yes, that's okay, I'm happy with that. So I will now click on the buildings layer. We just come off that tool a second. Right, so now we have our buildings, we have our sky. Now the only thing is here is that I'm not really that happy with the brightness of these buildings with these sort of darker, moodier skies. So I want to make the buildings look a bit moodier. Now I could do this by adding adjustments like layers or contrast or curves or things like that, but I want to do it by just using layers and their various blend modes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this buildings layer. So you can either just press Ctrl and J, or right click on the layer itself and come down to duplicate. Now you won't notice any difference because it's an exact copy of that layer and it's still in the normal blending mode. But this is where the blending modes come into their own. So I'm going to change the blending mode, and what that will do is will make this new buildings layer a bit more transparent in different ways, and that different way will help it blend in with the buildings layer below it, giving me a different look. So there are the three main ones that you can use. You can use any, but the three main ones would be multiply, which will make something darker, screen, that will make it lighter, or overlay, which will give you a bit more contrast. You know, the blacks will be blacker and the whites will be whiter, so that's sort of somewhere in between multiply and screen. So now the one I personally am going to use here is Hardlight. So as you can see, it has made that building a bit more darker and a bit more moodier, but I still want to go slightly further than that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this building layer again, but the Hardlight version. So I will just duplicate that, and as you can see, that has darkened it once more and made it a bit moodier just by adding a new layer with a blending mode that is different or not normal anyway. It's not the normal blending mode, it's something different. But this top one I'm going to change to multiply just to make it darker still. So I've got 3 versions of that building layer, and each has a different blending mode to give me this much darker, moodier buildings. Right, so you don't necessarily have to do this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the Control key and click on that buildings layer and that buildings layer, and then right click them and group them together. So they are all now together, and I can't sort of accidentally move one or alter one without physically going in there and altering it. Now the next thing I want to do is I'm quite happy with the darkness and moodiness of this building, but I think this one here has probably gone a little bit too dark. So I'm going to make another selection, and this time I am going to use the Freehand selection tool. Now, like before, you've had the new, add, subtract. So I'm going to go with new. Now there are three types of tool within this tool. The first one being the freehand one, so you can draw a shape or whatever you want. You have to be pretty good at with the mouse or whatever. You might be good with a pen stylus if you have one of those, but with a mouse I find it quite tricky. You have the polygonal, which is what I'm going to use at the moment. I'll come back to that. And you have the magnetic, I think this is. So the computer decides where the edges are. It can work, it can be a bit all over the place, so it's not something I use. But the polygonal one, you click on the start position, move to where you want to go next, click again, and then you just keep clicking as you go around a subject until you come back to your beginning, and then when you come back to the beginning you can double click and it will make the selection. So I'm not going to go around a building. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start up here, and you don't have to hold the mouse button down because it will have this sort of tail coming off of it, and you can come off the picture, it doesn't matter with this. I'm going to sort of come to about here, there, and say somewhere up there, and then back to the start position, and that has made that selection area for me. I'm just going to quickly refine that by a couple of pixels. Click apply. Now, because I'm going to be adding an adjustment to this, if I add, say, brightness and contrast, and I alter it where it is, as you can see, it will change the brightness and contrast of that area, but it is also changing the brightness and contrast of the sky, which I don't want. So what I need to do is to add the tool that I want to use. So go with brightness and contrast again, and before I make any alterations, I'm going to drag this down and wait until that blue line comes into, not all the way across, but just comes to the edge of the icon, and then I will release the mouse button and drop that into my group there. And if I've done this right, when I make the alterations now, it affects only the building and not the sky, which is what I want to do. So let me just, maybe it's a bit too bright, but just add a little bit of brightness to that building, and I'll shut that down. And if I want to refine the edges a bit more, I still can do. Just to, let's maybe ramp that up a bit. Let's go up to about 10 or so, just so we don't have such a sharp edge of light going down that building. So I can now press Control and D, and then hopefully that building now looks like it has a bit of extra light from the sunshine that's over here somewhere, and maybe a bit of shadow that's being cast by this building here. Now as you can see, I do have a slight white line at the top of this building here, which is probably where I should have used the ramp option to sort of just drop back this selection, but I'm going to leave it in. I'm not going to go backwards, but I mean, if you were doing this properly and a much more professional person doing a composite picture would have made a better job of that, but hopefully you will forgive me that slight error. So let me just close that group, highlight the top layer again, or the top group, and now we want the image of the aeroplane. And again, I said this is from Pixabay.com, but it's just a silhouette of a jumbo jet. So I will right click that, copy it, come back to my buildings image, and I will edit and paste that in. Now whenever you add a new layer image by pasting what have you, it will automatically add it as a new layer. You don't have to do that, it will do it all for you. So I'm just going to come to the move tool, and I'm going to put the jumbo jet over here, and I want to reduce the size of this, so I'll come to one of the corners, hold down the control key so it stays in proportion, and the next thing I want to do is to flip this image so the airplane is flying in the other direction, and for that I need to come to I always forget where this is, I'm very sorry. Arrange, oh here we go, arrange, that's it. Flip horizontally, very sorry about that, it will just flip that layer horizontally. So find a new position for this. I might just reduce it in size a bit more. There we go. So I'm not going to change any blending modes with this because it's already a silhouette, and it's not blocking anything out that I want to keep. So that is that element added. So we now have 3 of the 4 elements for the image. So all I need now is my man rock climbing. Now I'm just going to zoom in a bit here. Now, because in the finished village image this is going to be quite small, you don't necessarily have to be hypercritical about the selection you're going to make. You can do it if you want to, but for purposes that I'm going to use it for, I don't really need to be. So I'm going to start off with the selection brush tool. I'm going to increase the brush size a bit, make sure I'm on add, and then just select the areas that I want, and then reduce the brush sizes, maybe zoom in a bit more, and just pick up the areas that I've missed. That's pretty much all of that. Let's have a look down the back. It's easier, I think, to use this rather than using these bars, is to come to Navigator, and when you're zoomed in you have this little box that shows you what you're seeing on screen, and you can just click and drag this around. So it's much easier, I think. Nearly there. I am deliberately sort of going a bit over the top here with some of these selections. Alright, let me come back to alright, so I think it's only the arms I got left now. I was a little bit... Yes, just the arms. Right, almost there. Right, so if I zoom out again, as you can see, I've pretty much got all of the gentlemen there, but there are some areas where I partly deliberately and partly by error have selected some areas which I don't want. Now this is where I can change to a different tool, and I'm going to change again to the Polygonal tool, and I'm going to come to subtract. And if I zoom in again, I mean, so like obviously there's areas here that I'm not worried about having the hairs on his legs. So I'm going to start from outside this area and come to an edge and click, and then follow that down, and then I can come out, and then that will get rid of those selections there which I don't want. The same goes for his foot here. I can click outside the area, come to the edge that I do want, right, where's the next one? I mean, it's slightly time consuming, but it's worth it in the end, I think. I mean, I personally, I'd like to use the selection brush tool on add and the polygonal tool on subtract, and swap between the two of them to get the selection that I'm after. Let me just come out here and finish that one, and then just do this bit here. Again, I don't want that bothered about the hairs on his legs. Alright, now there's a bit in between his legs here, so I'll just quickly and roughly go around this area. Right, I think we're getting. Oh yeah, there's a bit in between his arms. And like I said before, because this is going to end up being quite small, you're not going to notice little errors. But if you were going to use this as the main part of your image, you would have to make a much better selection than I'm doing here. Right, I think it's just a bit by the hands here, so I'm gonna just come up here. slightly wrong there, but I can still hopefully get that. Let's try that again. Wasn't my finest hour of selecting. There we go, that's good enough. So the trouble I'm doing is trying to make this as quick as possible. Right, I'm not worried about that. Head's okay. I think I've pretty much got, oh, there's just that little bit down there. Right, I think that's it. Yeah, so I'll press Control and 0. Now this time I will I press Control and J again. So if I turn off that background area, that is just that gentleman there, I can now press Control and D to get rid of the selection area, and I can just right click that layer only and copy it, come to my building image and then edit and paste him into the image and resize him. So again, hold down the Control key while I click and drag this corner in, and I'm also going to rotate that image as well a bit. Let's have him about there. I think just reduce him in size a little bit more, because he would be quite small on a building that size, but have him near the edge so you can see him. Right, yeah, so that's, I think I like him like where he is there. So much like I did with the building, I want to make him a little bit darker, so I will duplicate that layer and change the blend mode maybe to multiply. So that is it really. I've finished making a composite image just by using selection tools and layers in various blend modes. Nothing else, nothing really fancy. So it is hopefully a good way of showing you what you can do with just selection tools and layers. So thank you for watching, and goodbye.